It's time to check your money with America's money maven, Vicki Brackens. Vicki Brackens is the president of Brackens Financial Solutions Network, LLC, and a registered representative of LPL Financial, member SIPC. Vicki, we have a special guest in the building.
Yes, we do. We have a special guest in the building today, and we're starting the beginning of the year, again, on the theme of economic opportunity and inclusion. And today we have the Senior Vice President for Inclusive Growth, Mr. Dominic Robinson. He is with CenterState CEO, which is, by the way, the Corporation for Economic Opportunity. Dom, thank you very much for joining us today.
It is truly an honor to be here with you both.
Well, I'm going to make sure that because I always get excited. I don't know if you noticed it, and I start speeding up in the way that I start talking. So let me slow this down for a minute. Okay. You are, as I said, the Senior Vice President for Inclusive Growth, which, based on my visual take and looking at the numbers of individuals on your team and your portfolio, it appears that you have the largest and most expansive team in the institution, which is known as CenterState CEO. So let's start with the name, basically what your title is, and tell me and tell the audience why you decided to communicate what you do under that title.
That's a great question. I appreciate it. I think it's important to acknowledge that my background was one of, I was involved in high school teaching and coaching of football. I was a community organizer. And frankly, from a young age was always a believer in, trying to maximize human potential, especially where often that potential was being unrealized or squandered, right? And I spent a lot of time in my adult life in, what would be considered urban or low-income communities. And, I think that after many years of doing work in that space, it became very clear to me that no matter what we did, if we weren't changing the economic conditions in neighborhoods, in places and among communities that had been historically disconnected from those conditions, or frankly, marginalized out of opportunity, then we weren't really going to fully actualize people or communities. And so it really led me down a path of economic development and thinking about how do we translate economic growth to the people who need it the most. And I think that at the end of the day, what we can say comfortably is that poverty at its base is an economic problem, and it requires economic solutions. And so my path led me to CenterState CEO because, from my vantage point 15 years ago, that's where decisions were often being made. That's where business leaders were converging. The political leaders of our community were converging. And, credit to the board and Rob Simpson for, kind of buying into a vision of how do we marry, a pro-people and a justice-oriented agenda with an economic growth agenda, and actually not only marry those things, but understand that they are fundamentally symbiotic. And for people who think that, trying to nurture opportunity in a low-income neighborhood, for example, is somehow charitable in nature, then they aren't truly understanding economics, right? And we have to really think about how creating economic opportunity and wealth in places where it does not currently exist at the right levels not only helps those individual lives, but it frankly improves the quality of life in our whole community. So that's the thesis that I've been operating under now for over a decade at CenterState, and I think over time that thesis has proven to be right. We've had success, and I think it has become our prevailing model for how we approach our regional growth, right? It's not a set aside anymore. So yes, you're right. We have the largest team at CenterState CEO. We drive the lion's share of our organization's budget, and we're not shy about celebrating our role in, for example, attracting a Micron to Central New York or facilitating company expansions.
That was your team. That was your team. The Micron.
We were a part of that. Yeah.
You want to make that clear? Okay, got you.
And so, listen, that was a team effort. There was no person, organization, or team that was part of that. That was responsible for that alone. But yeah, of course, we played a role. And at the end of the day, we're very proud of that. But it doesn't matter if it doesn't translate to opportunity and generational wealth building for people in our neighborhoods and people, frankly, who are struggling on the margins of the economy in the rural parts of our region, for that matter, too, right? So it's got to be a holistic approach that is unequivocally committed to inclusion and not just by accident.
Yeah. So, I am so glad you took the time to go through that history and sort of bring everybody forward, because when you are in the trenches and you have efforts that take many years before they get to fruition, where you're planting seeds and you and I have had some headbutting over time, because we want it to happen now. I want it to happen now.
Yep.
But when we're watching and waiting for those green shoots, it's important for us, now that we've reached some of the milestones that we were looking for 10 or 15 years ago, to go back and put some of those pieces in play so everyone can remember the steps that we went through.
Yes.
So what I heard most is that you are, and tell me if I'm wrong, you are more concerned with human capital growth than necessarily hard asset growth. Or are they intertwined for you?
Well, by all means, they're intertwined, right? I mean, when we see investments in real estate, in companies, those things are generating economic activity. But I think that sometimes we can, especially in economic development, right, we can reduce that field to numbers. And we can think about, oh, well, we, created this level of capital investment, or we created this number of jobs, but jobs are in the abstract. And I think that we have to remind ourselves that when we are, especially bringing public funds to bear, when we are, bringing, a lot of different partners to bear, if all that growth, if all that capital investment does not translate to an improved quality of life for the people living in a community, then I would argue we're missing the right metrics, right? And so I think that the problem is that we're often trained to think about, okay, economic development, I'm in not my lane, I'm worried about how to get the right packages together to get a company here. And then there isn't also in that same conversation a consideration around, well, what does it mean to have the right community outreach strategy? How do we market those jobs? How do we get people supported to get into those jobs? And frankly, how do we make sure that those jobs are going to pay a family sustaining wage, and that they have the right financial assets and resources and support to translate that into savings, into wealth, into first time home ownership, whatever it is, right? And so I think that it's really about changing the paradigm to a very narrowly focused set of metrics that are often about dollar signs, and expanding them to think about how does that translate into the lives of people.
So we've got right now, and I'm going to focus on these three things as we go through this last segment. Right now, we've got about three major pillars of growth and innovation that are happening in the community that I can focus on. One is 81, and the reimagining of the transportation infrastructure of Syracuse. The second one is strengthening the innovation and infrastructure for one of our major economic pillars, which is healthcare. And then the final one is catapulting the Central New York economy into what I would call the forefront of manufacturing and technology future, not only for the country, but for the world.
That's right.
In Micron.
That's right.
When we look at these three endeavors and the major impact that they're going to have on the citizens of Central New York, in your opinion, can you give me 3 to 5 major issues that everyone needs to embrace to successfully participate and profit from these three major drivers of economic growth?
Whew, that's a great question. So first of all, I think that we, a lot of things start with jobs.
Yeah.
And so I think that when we think about the investments coming specifically in the two of the things you mentioned, right? Both I-81 and Micron. As you know, Vicki and George, like these are two projects that we've been rallying around for the better part of a decade now, to make sure that there is a convergence of partners that are connecting people to those jobs. That means a lot of things, right? It's about training, but it's also about outreach. It's about all the supports that you can bring to the table to help somebody get over the hump, and to do that at a systemic level at scale. it is not going to happen by accident, and it's not going to happen through business as usual. So jobs is a foundation that we're starting from. I think the other thing that we have to recognize is that, especially true related to Micron, but if you think about all the investment coming into our community, there's so much opportunity for entrepreneurship and innovation. And if you look back at our history, we were a company town. We lived and died effectively, almost, with the rise and fall of the likes of Carrier and GE and all the rest, right? And if you think about an indicator of a healthy economy, churn, right? Are we creating more businesses than are closing, right? If we are overly reliant on a few large businesses, then A, we have a town full of employees predominantly and not owners. And B, we are susceptible to the rise and fall of global markets. If you create a stronger and more vibrant ecosystem of entrepreneurs and startups, especially a more diverse ecosystem of entrepreneurs and startups, then we are more resilient for years to come. And so I think that's another one I would really drive home. Something that I think applies across the board, and I got two more things. One is wealth generation and the wealth gap.
Oh, now you're talking Vicki's language now.
I know. And I'm not even speaking to my audience. This is where Vicki and I, at least, we can bond. But at the end of the day, when you really drill into numbers, and these numbers are kind of harder to come by sometimes than they should be, but based upon I don't need to say this in this venue, but years of systemic exclusion from the accrual of assets and wealth. Our communities of color in particular, while we might be able to accelerate their access to jobs and opportunities, we have to acknowledge that's only part of the equation, right? How do we help people grow their families' assets that have generational impact? And that requires a lot of different strategies, and that's certainly hard, and there's no silver bullets, but I think we have to call that out and hold ourselves as a community accountable to that, because of things like rates of business ownership and home ownership and overall asset ownership are persisting a decade from now at the divide that currently exists along racial lines, then we will have missed the mark, right? We have to start closing that gap. The last thing I'm going to say, and it's the thing that I think doesn't keep enough people up at night, but it should, is housing. We are already experiencing a housing crunch in the city of Syracuse and across central New York. Quality housing of all kinds is just experiencing incredible levels of demand.
Well, Dominic, when you say housing crunch, right? Because I see cranes in the air. So what kind of housing crunch are we talking about?
Well, I think what's important to acknowledge is that while we have a lot of technically vacant spaces, we have a very small number of available single-family and multifamily units that are both of quality and within a range of affordability. Okay. And it doesn't all have to be low-income housing, but in general, just some of the very conservative projections that we've developed at Center State and with some of our consultants, we're probably going to have to add to keep pace with what will inevitably be population increase. The region probably needs to add somewhere to the tune of 2,000 units a year, and that's not all happening all at once. There's ebbs and flows, but on average, that's how many units we would need to add a year to keep up with the pace of what will inevitably be population increase as more jobs come here and more opportunity. And so, but I also think about the opportunity that comes with doing a better job of making good quality housing available, especially in within the lines of first-time home ownership. And so I think if we aren't careful, we're going to have a very expensive housing market, and one that's very difficult to navigate, especially for people who are on the lower ends of our economy.
Okay. So I want to make sure before we close that we cover some very basics, like how would you suggest that everyone stay connected to what's happening? First of all. Okay.
Well, that's a great question. I think that something that we've been trying to do consistently is create kind of different community engagement opportunities. But by all means, I think between our website, centerstateceo.com, And then, I think that Onondaga County, City of Syracuse, the Central New York Community Engagement Committee, chaired by Melanie Littlejohn and Tim Penix, there's going to be a lot of forums for opportunity there. But if I'm going to be really honest in my answer, Vicki, I don't think we've quite figured out where we have the go-to resources for all things related to all this right now. And I think that that's something that we're trying to chip away at within Center State, and certainly have a lot of resources online. But I think it's something that we need to continue to make progress towards.
Okay, and what should I do, or where should I go to have the best chance of being able to profit from these opportunities?
So I think the one thing we're really excited about, and this doesn't exist today, but it's upcoming, is that we have been asked by the governor's office to convene a group of community partners to launch this new on-ramp initiative that the governor announced in the State of the State last week. And the Syracuse version of that will be a city-based center with satellite locations in other parts of the region that will create kind of a single point of entry for workers or prospective workers who want to be part of the emerging job and career opportunities associated with Micron, associated with 81. And so that's going to be a center that's really focused on opportunities in manufacturing and opportunities in construction. There's a lot of other industries that are going to be doing a lot of great stuff, but right now those are two industries that are predominantly male, predominantly white, and aging. To meet the need of the future, it's not just like, hey, if you are interested, come see us. Right. It's we need you, right? And so I think that there's going to be a lot of information coming in the months and years ahead about how that all plays out. But I can tell you that will be, at least from a workforce perspective, a single point of entry, and one that will be representative of lots of partners. Sorry.
So you're talking about a physical place that's being developed.
That is correct.
That will be right in the city in order to address.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now we still got to get it finalized and passed in the state budget, but as long as the legislature does its job, we'll be good.
It's a proposal.
Okay.
It is a budget proposal. Now,
there you go.
Okay.
It's about investing in people, though. We invested in the business side. Now we got to invest in the people side.
Okay. And are there any key dates that are coming up in the next, say, 6 to 9 months that everyone should be aware of to keep on their calendars to make sure that they don't miss these dates going forward?
Well, I can't tell you that I got exact dates yet, but I think that I don't know. These are the best interview questions I've been asked in a while. So if it's an excuse to come back on your show with some more concrete dates, I'd be excited about that.
That's fine. We'll take
invitation
that. Okay?
accepted.
Okay. Absolutely. Okay.
That was a reverse invitation. I
like that. I like that.
Back on.
And there is no problem there. Listen,
right.
Again, we want to make sure that we thank you very much, for taking the time out of what's become, I know, from working with you, Dominic, an incredibly packed schedule. Again, we've had Mr. Dominic Robinson, Senior Vice President for Inclusive Growth for the Center State CEO Corporation for Economic Opportunity, as our guest today to really focus in on 3 of the major economic drivers in our community that are taking place. The 81 reimagining of infrastructure in Syracuse, what's happening with the economic pillars of our healthcare, and the catapulting technology future world that's being developed by Micron. Thank you very much again. And I will say to everyone, make sure that you have on your calendar February 25th. February 25th is our 16th annual Jazz and Arts Cabaret celebrating Black History Month at the Marriott downtown Syracuse. If you haven't gotten your tickets, you need to make sure you get your tickets right away. And if you have any questions, call me at area code 315-930-4499. Share and subscribe, and make sure you share and subscribe this segment. And I'll say at this point in time, George, our plate is full.
All right, Vicki Brackens is the president of Brackens Financial Solutions Network, LLC, and a registered representative of LPL Financial, member SIPC. She is America's money maven.